Diante,
You.
qu'est-ce qui se passe? That's French for what's going on.
Not a whole lot, man. I think that we are the internet's two favorite analysts to not be at the Senior Bowl, not do any of the strong game practices. The one question I have for you is which drills that get tweeted out, all day long, which ones are the ones that you actually care about or that you think you can actually glean any valuable information from?
You know what? What I want to see is when the coach is speaking, who's listening?
Okay.
That's what. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. It's always tough, like one-on-ones, just in general, and I think both of us know this from listening to some clinics, some coaching clinics, that a lot of teams are going away from that stuff in practice. We know Alabama does not do that stuff. There's no one-on-ones anymore in practice, and I certainly understand it for the Senior Bowl. You just want to get a look at the kids. I get it. I'm not even mad at that. But I think that when you see teams kind of going away from that and thinking like, hey, it's not an even battle. Receiver versus DB is heavily won by receivers. It's just tilted in that direction. So, I'm just vamping a bit, trying to figure out a drill. Do you have a drill in mind?
I can tell you which ones I hate the most, and you kind of touched on
go.
it. It's wide receiver DB one-on-ones.
Yeah.
It's not zero value, but if you're talking about like as close to zero as you can get in a one-on-one situation in football, it's wide receiver DB, because like inevitably, no matter what you do or how you try to coach it up, you're going to get a wide receiver who works a 2.5 second release and then chops at every 5 yard increment to sell the route. Like that kind of stuff I really hate, and it also teaches bad techniques for DBs, or it reinforces bad technique for a lot of DBs. So I don't like that. The one-on-one that I think you can kind of pick up a decent amount of intel from is from like linebacker, running back blitz pickup drills. I really like that.
I like that.
I've always been a really big fan of that. Like you can get a very clear picture of what a running back's mentality is.
That's what I was going to say.
Pass protection, less so than like the pass. Yeah. That is. I'm not one as a coach. I can tell you, I'm not really one for like the toughness drill. Like I think that things need to be skill building, but in terms of mentality and want to, the linebacker, running back one-on-ones and pass protection is a great way to figure out which running backs actually stand tall when a guy has a 7 to 8 yard runway basically to run through the middle of his face, right? And the people who stand up tall in those scenarios usually trend in becoming like the best pass protectors in the NFL, right? Like I think a lot about Ezekiel Elliott and watching how he would perform in pass protecting situations through college, getting ready for the pros, and a lot of that stuff just translated right over into the NFL.
Still very good at it. The two individual reps that I saw that really killed me this so far, from what I've seen on the internet, is there was a running back out of the backfield, running back linebacker, but in pass, not pass protection, in running routes. And the running back came out of the backfield and ran a whip route. And it's like, you've maybe seen that twice in my whole life, that route out of the backfield. And so he kills the linebacker, and it's like, okay, but like that's not a route that exists in anyone's offense. So there was that one.
It's the worst.
And then another one that was really great was receiver cornerback one-on-one, and they're on like the 40-yard line or whatever, and the cornerback is basically playing like goal line technique, taking away the slant. Like he's literally butt inside, shoulders faced entirely towards the sideline, like parallel to the sideline, and like 2-3 yards inside the receiver. And it's like that's not a real rep. Goal line technique.
Yes, like that's not a real rep.
It's not. None of this is real. Yeah. And again, it's important, I think, just to see the kids run around and see their athletic ability. But winning and losing one-on-one seems to be relatively irrelevant.
I do like to watch quarterbacks work their way through like under center play action, footwork, hand placement, getting set. Like the mechanics of that can be like very particular to the NFL, especially today, considering where college is not anymore. So like watching quarterbacks it's like watching them try to learn how to walk as a quarterback, basically. Like, okay, so I open here, I have to show my hand here, but not the ball too much. And then I have to flip my hips, my shoulders, get set, and still be able to read the field, right? And that's one of the things that we've talked about with quarterbacks all the time, right? Like these are the little small, intricate difficulties that can really affect and influence the way that teams have to call offenses based on what your quarterback can and can't do, right? Like I forget who was telling the story, but one of these coaches in a clinic I was listening to was talking about like how they never ran bootlegs with Tom Brady, not because he doesn't know the mechanics of a bootleg, but if the shit don't work, don't play to your strength, then you're not going to do that within the offense and stuff like that. Like a lot of quarterback evaluations sound like phrenology to me. Like it's a lot of pseudoscience that I think gets involved.
It's all pseudoscience.
Yeah. So like, but that is one of the things where you can look and be like, okay, he loses his feet here, or he doesn't have the best balance. If you can kind of look at like how he looks trying to regain his platform after moving, and I think that kind of stuff can be valuable too. But a lot of this is just people posting Twitter videos to be retweeted by the draft Twitter largesse, and like it. I guess it's nice for what it is. People like to get their fix in football throughout the week, and I guess that's just another way to create content throughout the week.
There you go. Just a reminder that the Too High podcast is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. I need Western and Southern for my Tropico 6 addiction because I lose money in that video game like you wouldn't believe. I'm just like a bottomless pit of lost money. Can't export anything. Anyways, I just needed to get that off my chest. Let's get into some coaching stuff because the Vikings hired Kevin O'Connell to be their head coach. They had flirted with Jim Harbaugh. First, we heard Jim Harbaugh to the Vikings. Then we heard Jim Harbaugh to Miami. And then some of the reports are saying that if Jim thought that it was going to happen and it was a formality that he was being interviewed, and then the Vikings didn't think of it like that. And they end up getting Kevin O'Connell, who comes off the now famous Sean McVay tree. Your thoughts, initial thoughts on this one?
I'm always going to be a little hesitant about hiring guys this deep down a coaching tree, right? And a lot of this is because it's not just McVay, right? Like you have to talk about it kind of as a shared staff in sorts between Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, because they've been kind of borrowing and poaching from one another when McVay was on his way out and taking over as the Rams head coach. So, I don't know. Like Shane Waldron leaving and going to Seattle, I thought was kind of mixed results, and obviously not having Russell Wilson healthy for the whole year and having him battling what was going on with this thumb, like it's hard to really get a super clean evaluation on that. And there's some kind of franchise turmoil that was happening at the end of the year anyway. So I don't know how to really kind of contextualize all of it, not being a Seattle insider. People say that the guy is bright, but people say that everybody off the McVay and Shanahan tree are bright play callers. And I don't doubt it, right? Like it's a system-based offense. If you understand how to make that work, then you're probably going to be good at, executing what's necessary. I just don't know. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, they ran a kind of bastardized version of it anyways between Stefanski when he was there. You had Kubiak when he was there, and Clint Kubiak was right behind Gary, as a part of the construction of this offense. So it's really a continuation of what they've already been doing. It's just getting a guy who runs the offense instead of having Mike Zimmer as the person out in front. So
I agree. In terms of just the offense, I think the interesting thing to me is probably going to be like the use of CJ Ham. Because, you look at Shanahan, obviously, like, O'Connell, I'm not sure if you ever coached with Shanahan, but obviously there's similarities there. Like, Juszczyk as a fullback is very different than CJ Ham as a fullback. Yes. And they were used appropriately in those two systems.
100%.
But you wonder, because of what the Rams have been in this non-fullback stuff, or using non-fullback bodies at the quote-unquote F position, I guess you would say.
Well, like, even if you want to take just like 2017 to 2020 era McVay, right? Like the fullback, quote-unquote, then was Robert Woods, right? But that, right? If you're to take Kyle Juszczyk, who we know is his own unique force as a fullback, and then Robert Woods, who has a very unique skill set as a slot receiver, you're not going to use Justin Jefferson like you use Robert Woods. That would be a waste. That would be a
Or
waste. You
Thielen.
wouldn't, or Thielen, right? Like that would be a waste of those two players and their skill set. So that actually is an interesting small little detail as far as like how do you make this personnel work? Because you probably want one of Jefferson or Thielen in the slot basically at all times to try to get him close to Kirk Cousins on a lot of these routes and set up these bending routes and over routes and things crossing the middle of the field. But that means that you have to have something figured out in terms of creating the threat of like two-back run game, especially with this like zone scheme, whether you're running the tosses, the jets, if you want to get in a duo that's not really playing to the strength of Jefferson and Thielen either. They're not necessarily near the line of scrimmage blocker types.
I always liked Jefferson on the duo as a point.
He was good at it. He was pretty good at it at LSU.
Right, exactly.
He wasn't horrible at it. Him and Chase, right? They're physical. They're physical relative to their size. Yes, I will say that. Yes. They're very physical relative to their size, but they just haven't been used that way. So maybe it's just in the NFL at least. So maybe it's just my fault for not being able to be imaginative enough to see it. I just don't know if that's the best use of their skill set. Yeah. And if it's not, then
I would say especially with Jefferson becoming such a good outside player.
Right.
You know what I mean? Exactly. Like he only plays in a slot in 2019 at LSU, and then he becomes such a good outside player. I think it's an interesting conversation. You talk about Shane Waldron going to Seahawks, and we've had this conversation throughout the year. Like, what is a Seahawks offense look like when Russell Wilson is the quarterback? Well, it looks like the Russell Wilson offense.
Right.
And I think you can say the same thing if Kirk Cousins is going to be the quarterback, we'll see. I do think he'll probably be the quarterback for at least one more year there.
Yeah.
There is a Kirk Cousins offense, and the Kirk Cousins offense probably, like you said, is a two-back offense because you want the advantageous looks you get from that defenses will give you in the NFL from having a fullback on the field and a fullback lined up in an eye, a fullback lined up in an offset position. You know what I mean? Like, so that I think is really interesting because then we end up having the same conversation every year, which is like, who controls the offense, especially when you get these hyper-specialized players like a Russell Wilson and even like a Kirk Cousins who needs a certain type of offense, and like Jimmy G, who we're going to talk about, like who needs a certain type of offense that fits them, and you can't just like plop them in anywhere. So I think that to me is an interesting thing, and it really does revolve around the usage of C.J. Ham, who gets a lot of run under both Kubiaks and under Stefanski before him. So yeah, that to me is really interesting. I mean, now there's always that thing that we just will never know. Is he a good teacher? Is he a good leader? All that stuff. Like,
are you good at making adjustments? Like I need to do some research on like what his actual role within McVay's staff is, right? Like, and see, like, were you in charge of like all the third downs? Because that says something to me, right? That means that you are a good enough thinker and a good adjuster that you can take information throughout a game and say, hey, in the most important situations, we're expecting X, Y, and Z, so we're going to do X, Y, and Z to find success. I will say, like, if I had to prognosticate or if I'm trying to envision in my mind the best version of this offense, it probably looks very similar to Tennessee.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I would say like at least if you're going to have to use C.J. Ham to create two-back offense, I would say that it should look like Tennessee. We're trying to get
Tennessee,
a downhole.
2020, 2019.
Right, exactly. So like again, like that kind of Stefanski-esque heavier personnel. The play actions that we're using are deep pockets for these in breakers. The Shanahan style with Jimmy Garoppolo is probably another really good example of that, where you can get like Justin Jefferson in the Brandon Ayuk role within that offense.
I don't think it looks like Goff or Stafford offense.
No, I don't think so either. At least I don't know if that's the best use of the personnel that they have available to them right now. And because they have so many expensive veterans and you're kind of tied to Kirk Cousins, like there's more financial incentive, like you were saying, to bring Kirk Cousins back and just ride this thing out than to just have the dead cap sitting and not really be able to make any improvements at the position in a year where you're probably not drafting the strongest prospects at quarterback anyways. So yeah, I would say somewhere between.
Well, they already have Kellen Mond, so.
Oh God, yeah. We all heard how Mike Zimmer felt about Kellen Mond. I will say that it may be. I think it may behoove them to try to run something between like the Shanahan versus like the Tennessee tree of condensed splits. You're trying to get downhill in the run game. And the play actions you take are more for like the deeper, not necessarily the bootleg, try to pick up 7-8 yards. And I don't expect like any of the empty or spread out stuff that you see with the Rams at all.
Yeah, I agree. Let's head over to Joe Brady, who is going to become the quarterback coach in Buffalo. So they lose Brian Dable to the Giants. They promote from within for the new OC job, and that's Ken Dorsey getting the job there. And then they go and hire Joe Brady to replace Ken Dorsey's position at quarterback coach.
Right.
I think my thing is, there's been like with Brady is like, do you foresee this as a bounce back? And now, obviously, tying himself to Josh Allen, that's pretty smart.
Yeah.
But do you see this as an ability to bounce back and be an OC and then maybe a head coach somewhere, or have people kind of cooled on the Joe Brady hype?
I can only speak for me. I don't put much stock in how Matt Rule feels about Joe Brady, if I'm being honest with you. So his stock really wasn't it hasn't changed much, I will say, between how I felt about his tenure in Carolina. Like, he's not a flawless guy, which is why, like, strategically, to your point, tying yourself to Josh Allen as a quarterback in an offensive infrastructure like Buffalo's is going to be really, really good for his resume, because he probably needs something to stamp and say, hey, all this spread out stuff that I really want to do, it can be done. Yeah. Like, you probably want to be in an ecosystem that lends itself to that, and working with the quarterback that kind of maximizes your thought process as a coach. So good for you, in terms of being like a social climber through this for Joe Brady. I think that, for him, this could be a 1-year bounce back thing. Like, I do believe that the pathway is there, right? If Buffalo is playing in an AFC title game next year, then yeah, I do expect his name to be a hot name to be picked up as an offensive coordinator. Even if it's with the Bills, because maybe Ken Dorsey becomes a head coaching candidate if they have another good year offensively after Daboll leaves. So it'll be an interesting thing to watch. I don't know much about like his quality as a quarterback's coach. I don't have a great beat on that. Working with Joe Burrow and now Josh Allen obviously doesn't hurt. And you're not going into situations where you're trying to fix a guy, right? Josh Allen has already ironed out a lot of the issues that he had in his game. Joe Burrow was already, a pretty good pocket mover, even in the year that was kind of up and down in 2018 at LSU, right? It was just a matter of getting the system in place that was really going to feature his skill set. So you're not working with guys. It's like, okay, we're tearing this down, or he has a significant issue with X, Y, and Z, and we're trying to fix that with our coaching. I think this is just going to be a matter of like what role he has within the staff, similar to our conversation about O'Connell, and seeing whether or not he actually adds value with the departure of Brian Daboll.
I'll tell you what gives me pause a bit is his relationship with Teddy Bridgewater. Mm-hmm. So I don't know their relationship, but so if I'm not mistaken, the thing was when Teddy came into New Orleans, Joe Brady, who was on staff, as an assistant there, one of his tasks was to get Teddy up to speed with the offense. Right. So they're together every day going over stuff, blah, blah, blah. And it's one of the reasons why he's able to go and bring Teddy to Carolina when he becomes the OC there. And then for Teddy to come out and kind of say, hey, I didn't really like a lot of stuff we were doing in practice. We didn't do this, we didn't do that, we didn't do that. After his tenure there, that concerns me a little bit, I guess. But yeah, I think tying himself to Josh Allen, that's what you gotta do, man. Like,
it's the best way to bounce back. It's the best way to bounce back.
I'm like the worst quarterback coach in the world. I accidentally tied myself to two really good quarterbacks. And the same when two on the men's side, and then coaching the women's team, I accidentally tied myself to two really good. I got the female Cam Newton. Like I'm good. Hey. She can ball.
Sometimes that's all you need, man. That's all you need. My defense looked a whole lot better when I had a guy going to Boise State on the edge. So it's not exclusive to you or to Joe Brady. But I do think that's a good point, right? And some of that may just be like Teddy Bridgewater's personal.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So I don't know. Right. We're all just guessing about the importance of a lot of these factors anyhow.
It's funny how like the stock his year at LSU, the mentality, the image changes a bit. And it's like, well, it was actually Steve Edminger's offense there.
Right.
And actually who called the plays? Well, it was, Brady only did this situation, blah, 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 blah.
And it has been like that at more than one stop. Right. Because even leaving New Orleans for LSU. It was a little like, he just kind of knows the offense. It's not like you're getting Sean Payton Jr. to come down here, and then you were just detailing what it was at LSU on the way out, and then Carolina, at least Matt Rules, if I'm going to give some credence to this, and this is true, like, they didn't run the ball a lot. And if that's an important thing to your head coach, and you just kind of fly in the face of that, then yeah, you probably are not the best person to work with. So I do think that there may be some merit to it. I just don't have enough inside information,
right? Exactly,
one direction or the other. But again, to your point, like, best thing strategically for him is to get here, and the only thing to be mad at for Joe Brady is that he didn't wait maybe a couple of days for Mike Kafka to get announced as a hire and try to go to Kansas City and be the quarterback's coach there.
Okay, let's talk about Jimmy Garoppolo. I think we assume at this point he's played his last game for the San Francisco 49ers. Is there a team you think that'll have a quarterback opening, whether it's Pittsburgh, whether it's Tampa Bay now, that fits him, or anything?
I would say Pittsburgh's an obvious one in terms of fit. We've talked about this with some of our other NFL guys, right? That Pittsburgh is just one of those teams that just doesn't have much history of making splash trades, right? Like the Minka thing was a big deal for Pittsburgh because they don't really part with high draft picks to go get guys. That's not their deal. They're more of a draft and development type of place. So that's one spot that may be interesting. Indianapolis is another one that I've kind of got half an eye on. We'll see how they feel about Wentz. And their financial situation going forward. And then, I'll tell you, if I'm San Francisco, I would probably make a call to Vegas and say, hey, we got your guy that your head coach happened to like a little bit while he was in New England. Like, you want to make a 1-for-1 swap, But even that, now you're introducing the factor of, do you want to bring in a starting caliber quarterback if you already have a guy on a rookie deal that you went and traded a bunch of first round picks for? So I don't even know if that's very tenable. Maybe Washington, potential. I wouldn't hate that either. I really wouldn't hate that for Washington. I think that would be an improvement. So there are some teams kind of in that mid range where I think you could maybe take at least like a half step forward. But, a lot of this is all going to be based on, I guess, what you think the ceiling of the team is more so than the ceiling of Jimmy Garoppolo, because we already kind of know who he is as a quarterback.
Yeah, I gotta say anything about Jimmy until like something happens, only because it's too soon from the NFC Championship game.
Right.
I'm like, this guy should not be playing quarterback in the NFL. And that's not fair, right? Because of that last game. That's the last taste in my mouth. I'm I'm going to refrain from saying anything like that. What I did want to say, and we're going to get into more Super Bowl preview next week, but, rewatched the 49ers offense against the Rams, and I'll tell you what, the Rams defense busted coverage a lot.
Yes.
If they do this, they were just all over the place. Like Weddle moving outside leverage on that bracket type thing. Mm-hmm. Two guys in a flat, and then no one over the middle of the field when they're in like fire zone. I think like just a whole bunch of stuff like that I couldn't understand. There's a play where Juszczyk is on the outside running just a go route on the outside, and no one. I think they're
no one covers him.
No one covers him.
Yeah.
It's just weird, and I'm just like, hey, you look at the Bengals team, and we say it all the time, like there are more good players on the Rams defense than there are on the Bengals offense by far. Mm-hmm. But if you bust like this with Joe Burrow instead of Jimmy Garoppolo, you can get burned.
Right.
Anyways, like
as simple as that. It is as simple as that. They can't play coverage like that, right? Like
it was weird.
Yeah, and I don't like it wasn't even in a way where like when we were talking about the Bucs and the Eagles, right? Where it seemed like Tampa Bay was kind of goading Hurts, challenging him, like, hey, if you're the quarterback that you're supposed to be, you'll be able to get to the backside of these progressions and punish us for this. It was a lot of the Rams just kind of cutting guys loose because they just weren't very sound in their coverage execution, right? Yeah, so like in that way, it was kind of concerning, and especially for a guy who works as well between the numbers as Jimmy Garoppolo did, for him not to punish them for that. That was when I was like, to your point of like, this dude can't play quarterback for anybody in the NFL right now. Yeah, it's easy to walk away from that game feeling that low about Jimmy.
All right. Diante, did you know that roses are red, violets are blue, and you shouldn't let a wild pube wreck you? Valentine's Day is just around the corner, and our sponsors at Manscaped are here for you with the best tools to get your skin ready for the special occasion. This Valentine's Day, it's time to join the 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped, the leaders in below-the-waist grooming. With our exclusive offer, go to manscaped.com and use promo code PFF for 20% off and free shipping. The holidays went by so quickly. Did you remember to take care of your private area? We have the best tools for the job. The Performance Package 4.0 from Manscaped is just the thing everybody needs in their life to make each and every day just a little more special. Manscaped created their products for a night just like Valentine's Day. You get the razor, you get the toner, you get the ear and nose hair trimmer, you get the whole thing. Very good products. Get 20% off and free shipping with the promo code PFF at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com with the promo code PFF. Join Cupid and shoot your arrow with Manscaped this Valentine's Day season. All right, that's enough from us. You are about to listen to us with, okay, enough. Yeah. You get more of us actually,
right?
But you get the three of us because we're gonna go with our tour interview with Conor McQuiston. All right, see you guys. We now welcome to the show Mr. Conor McQuiston, PFF Conor, football research intern here at PFF, to talk to us about recruiting. Conor, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. Hanging out in some bagels. Had an interesting pre-podcast introduction, but we're going at it. We're doing great.
Yeah, we're gonna have to eventually release the audio of what I called you pre-show. First of all, you are just outside of Philadelphia, so you have like a Philadelphia bagel, I guess you would call it a Philadelphia bagel.
Yeah, it is the I'm currently eating a bagel because it's bulking season. It's not like a store brand. Well, they have like a bakery in the grocery store. Everything bagel is pretty good.
I don't consider anything that's not a Montreal bagel a bagel. I'm just going to put that out there. Like, I don't care what anybody says.
So you're the New York snob of bagels, but for Montreal?
Yeah.
So, okay. If you want to live your life in a terrible way, you are free to do so.
This is the most Gen Z millennial fucking debate I have ever heard. We're arguing the regional validity of our bagels. What is happening to this podcast?
Welcome to East Coast, buddy.
This was always what the podcast was supposed to be about, okay? It only became a football podcast when I brought you on, okay?
Hey, I mean, if I'm going to participate, the one thing I will say is that the only real Mexican food that exists in this country is in the city that I live in, so.
There you go.
So, in my hometown, there's a couple of good Mexican food spots. We have a pretty large Guatemalan and Latino population, so.
This is fake.
You can't, I don't want to like get into too much here, Conor, but you can't say Mexican spot and say we have a good big Guatemalan. It's two different places.
Well, Guatemalan and Mexican,
there we go.
Okay, I sorry for putting you on the spot like that. All right,
it was worth clarification.
I used to live in Little El Salvador here in Montreal, and food was excellent. The people were excellent. All right. I don't know why I brought that up.
So anyways,
let's get into recruiting.
Off to a roaring start today.
Because recently, depending on when you're listening to this, it was National Signing Day. And I think the first thing I want to talk to you about is this Texas A&M super recruiting class. Is it like when you break it down, and I'll before we really get into it, just to clarify something here, Conor does a lot of recruiting analytics, and I think it's a lot of people don't. It's not often broached subject, I think. So that's why we like talking to you. This is actually your second time on the podcast. We like talking to you. So yeah, Texas A&M super recruiting class. Is it really like the? Is this really like the class of all time?
So that thing is tough to say. By the way, 247 does their recruiting rankings. Yes, it is. But the way 247 does their recruiting rankings is kind of funky. So the way they do it is, of course, every player has a composite score. So that's some sort of weighted average of 247's score, ESPN 300, and Rivals' score. Those services are not created equal, in my opinion. But through this composite, then they add it up in a funky way, and they add weights, and they basically say your class is defined by the best players in your class. So So according by that methodology, it is the best class ever, but that's assuming that this only goes back to about 2011 when 247 started. And also this is assuming this is the correct way to do rankings. This is the correct way to say quantify how good the class is. So it's, I'm sure Texas A&M will say it. I think it's not a super useful metric to use, honestly.
I don't hate that. I mean, and the emergence of something like On3, right? Like there's always going to the competitors, all these competitors use composite scores, but they all kind of compete with one another and use different metrics to decide who's ranked where, and how these different companies access the events that they go and do all this evaluation off of, and who gets to participate in the evaluation process obviously is kind of up and down. And I've kind of been there firsthand for some of that process with players that I've coached or played with, and try to figure out how they kind of stack up versus other people. For you, I guess to kind of take it off of whether or not this class has validity as the greatest ever, what do you think, if it were you and you were standing as like the head of recruiting of one of these companies, what would be the criteria that you would be basing it off of? Would it be similar to 247 where you're kind of averaging out like the top composite scores in the class? Would you take a more kind of holistic approach? Would you be looking at different contextual factors? Like what would be your judgment metrics that you use?
So what 247 and On3 and all these different platforms trying to do when they rank classes, they say this class has the best players or the most best players is how they functionally try and do it. And the core basis of that is they have a bunch of scouts, a bunch of writers who go around to these different high schools and they give a number to a player. Sort of what PFF does, but it's more of like a scouting report thing than PFF grading every play. So through this method, if you have these underlying numbers and you trust them because you hired these writers, you're paying them money, you assume they're good at their job from their perspective. So if you're going to make ratings or rank classes, this is how you're going to do it. So from the perspective of a media entity like 247 and Rivals and On3 are, I think it's a good way to do it. Personally, I would just sum up all the composite ratings, but that's getting to like that granularity isn't terribly important. But from their perspective, it's fine. But from a fan of college football, from someone who's trying to analyze it a little bit, I wouldn't put too much stock in the minute differences between classes. The way I like to think about recruiting a lot of the time is like you have the blue chips and you have the top classes, and then you have everyone else. And when you get to the everyone else, you can consider them more or less equal. Why I think this, basically, if you go to a high school, you go to some local high school game, even your local high school game, dear listener, and you just watch the game, you can pick out the 2 or 3 best. Like you can probably do that. Can you rank them between who's the best between them, who will be the most likely to be good at the FBS level? Don't know, but you can pick out the best ones. So that's kind of how a macro scale think of that.
Yeah, I think that probably makes the most sense. I actually didn't know that 247 did it like that, but I think that's really interesting the way you're putting it. So let's stick in Texas, and I want to shout out your article that you wrote about National Signing Day, and it's called "Who Won the Top States on National Signing Day." So we'll go. Actually, explain your methodology on this one because there's some words here that I've never seen in my life, so you're gonna have to explain that.
Okay, so you haven't seen many words, so that's not a high compliment. But so there's two. So really, so the purpose of this article is saying like who college teams like to bang pound their chest about winning a state or winning or locking down your backyard. You've seen the U 30 for 30. You know what the state of Miami is. Like this sort of thing. So the way I go about this, I've tried a couple different ways in the past, but this is the way I like to do it now. Basically, look at the top 15 recruits in an area, whether that's a state or that's a city or whatever. You pick the top 15 recruits and you say, okay, of all the schools, so who got the most of these 15 recruits? Running with Texas A&M example, Texas A&M got, I think, 7 of the top 15 recruits in Texas. And that's the most of any team, so they won Texas. My eyes got. In Houston, they got 8 of the top 15 Houston recruits, or 7 maybe with Harold Cypress. I don't know. I've not all the numbers in front of me. But either way, that's the most of any team in Houston, so they won Houston. That's sort of the way I go about it. And the side metric I use, which we'll talk about later with some other states, it's called balkanization. This is a term from when I took AP Human Geography in my freshman year of high school. It's basically when the idea is like when the big country has a bunch of different groups, it's politically unstable and it kind of blows up. You get all these little tiny countries, Yugoslavia to all the countries that are in the Balkans right now. If you're old enough to remember that, which I am not. But we reflect this in recruiting by basically like we have these top 15 kids. We just assume that these kids are about equal, but they're better than the rest of the kids in the state, which most of the time is a fair approximation. We say, okay, how many schools are these 15 kids going to? So this has a max of 15. So every single one of those top 15 kids is going to a different school, or a minimum is one. They're all going to the same school. This is a measure of how locked down a state is. If a state is well controlled by one school, they'll go to very few schools. If it's not, then they'll go to a bunch. So those are the two main ways we look at it. I would look at it. You guys haven't done anything. Not giving you guys credit.
Wow! Holy shit! You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I just don't like being called out for it.
I will have you know that I've worked on multiple combines, sir, that have top recruits.
That's just a piece of shit.
Well, look, I have also done the combine stuff, and I have, had a pad in front of me and written down 40 times and written down long jumps and stuff like that. I've probably written down wrong a lot of times for the kids, and I always feel bad because that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
But I have been around. Okay, so let's stick in Texas. I guess the question is like, why did Texas A&M absolutely dominate a state as big as Texas with some pretty big programs in there as well?
Yeah. So the way A&M won Texas was fueled through Houston. Like they got in Texas, there's 4 major cities. There's Houston, the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, Austin, and San Antonio. Austin and San Antonio don't produce that much talent. You can kind of forget about them. Dallas and Houston are the 2 big cities in Texas. Dallas is easier to access for out-of-state schools. There's a bunch of conference headquarters there. Obviously, there's the DFW airport, and you kind of have to go out of your way to avoid going to Dallas. And there's just so much talent there. Schools go there anyways. So Houston.
Is this an airline thing?
Yeah, the hub of American, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, Dallas. Yeah, American Airlines Arena is Dallas's NBA arena, so I know that they're headquartered out there.
It's Dallas's NHL arena, but go on.
Excuse me. You have some nerve.
So this guy, actually, I want to start getting hockey, regardless. Both from the perspective of out-of-state programs and kids within the DFW area, it's easier to access out-of-state places. So when you have out-of-state programs, they come to Dallas. When you hear people talk about Ohio State or not really LSU or Bama or anyone or Georgia coming to Texas, they're coming into Dallas. That's where they're going. So A&M won. So A&M has since Jimbo has gotten there, they've shifted more of their attention towards Houston, and they've just been building this momentum over a couple of years now, and it really exploded this year. After even in Sark's second year, the first, of course, Sark's first last class was Sark's first. Those are always a little iffy, just because you have a really short time period to work with. You're not as familiar with the area, so things get kind of haywire. But even in this second cycle, I don't know. I'm not tapped in enough with Texas Longhorn football recruiting to know why Sark did, relatively speaking, so much worse than A&M, why they got beat out by A&M in Houston so much. That was really the lifeblood of why A&M kind of dominated Texas. And A&M's like a little closer to Houston. They're like 100 miles away. UT Austin's like 150 or so. So it's like something like that. Yeah, they won Houston by like a lot. Like they got 8 of winning an area by a lot nowadays is like 5 or 6, and they got 8 of the top 15, and that just
you're saying
doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen, right?
Just in Houston.
Yeah, just in Houston.
The top 15 in Houston. No, that's crazy.
Yeah, they got 8 of the top 15 in Houston, which is a really good high school football city.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. One of the things that I noticed in the article was UTSA winning in San Antonio, which obviously, yes, it is a school in San Antonio, but San Antonio, like you said, being one of the 4 biggest cities in Texas, at least for recruiting, does that signal anything to you? Like, not necessarily like, hey, UTSA, they had this great season with Jeff Traylor and like they're on the up and up, or is it other schools not going into San Antonio?
It's a little bit of both. So San Antonio just isn't super great high school football town. You think, oh, it's in Texas, it's good, but it's really not that great. I've heard some. I'm not tuned into necessarily.
Too close to Guatemala. That's the problem.
Don't put it like that. But on the surface level, the explanation does tend to be that much of the working class in San Antonio comes from families who immigrate up from Latin America. So most of those kids then go play soccer. That's the baseline reason I've been told. I don't know how true that is. I'm not super tapped in with San Antonio. Obviously, I'm some Yankee, but San Antonio, for whatever reason, it just isn't a super great high school town. Like there's only like 8 or I think there was only like 12 kids that went to an FBS school from the San Antonio area, and UTSA got 2 of them. So like,
okay.
Not a lot of schools are going there, but of the ones that were there, UTSA got them. So good for them, I guess, but it's not a huge win by any means. Jeff Traylor is doing some interesting things, and he is doing really well in Texas. Just winning San Antonio in particular isn't a super noteworthy thing, especially by the margin they won it.
The question I kind of have for you, Connor, is just looking at your map, were there any surprises for you within the data as far as like where schools performed well, right? Like seeing Oklahoma win Nevada. Now, a lot of that is obviously going to be like, if you get the best players at Bishop Gorman, you're going to win. Oh, you're going to win the state, basically. So I'm sure that that's probably a big piece of it. But outside of like things like that, were there any surprises for you in terms of which schools won, which states, especially if it happened to come outside of their own home state?
So the 2 biggest for me was Kentucky winning Tennessee and UNC winning Virginia. UNC winning Virginia in particular is surprising because we'll get to Tennessee in a minute, but they like cleaned up in Virginia. Like I said earlier, like 5-6 is you're doing really well in a state. 5-6 of the top 15 kids in the state or the city, you're doing really well. Like the high end this year was Arkansas winning Arkansas with 10 of the top 15 kids. Because no one really wants to go in Arkansas. Yeah, good for them. Go Big Suey or whatever they're saying.
Wow. Right. Wow. I apologize. My Arkansas people. I apologize. Please call me
No, but so that's like the high end. UNC won 6 of the top Virginia kids. And Virginia is typically a pretty competitive state because one, you have the 2 in-state programs, UVA and Virginia Tech. I mean, they're routinely solid. Virginia Tech more as of late. Penn State tries to come down to Virginia. Ohio State comes down to Virginia. A bunch of schools are trying to like poach Virginia kids.
It's a UNC.
You should.
There's some good freaking players down there in Virginia.
Yeah, I think that's like it has. I think the average is 11.5 blue chips per year since 2011.
And if you're talking like per capita numbers, as far as like guys who have matriculated through college and ended up in the NFL, Virginia's as strong a state as there is in the country. Yeah,
and even if this is a preference thing. I prefer to look at volume because, like, if you're from a program's perspective, even if there's like, Mississippi is really good per capita, but like if there's only like 6 really good kids from Mississippi, it doesn't really help you that it's really good per capita. But regardless, that's an abstract example. I know Mississippi has more than 6 good players.
Right.
But Virginia is typically a pretty competitive state, and UNC as an out-of-state program just kind of like wiped the floor with everyone. Mm-hmm. But the really interesting thing about this is obviously they took advantage of Virginia Tech and UVA changing head coaches.
I was going to ask that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you kind of beat me to it because my question really, the thing that I found a lot of interest in is whether or not these out-of-state wins carry over year. And obviously you have access to more of the data and you've spent more time on this. So that's kind of where my curiosity is if you're a school like UNC and you go and win Virginia, which is obviously going to be very competitive for all the ACC, SEC, and Big Ten schools, is there any reason to believe that stuff like this rolls over from one year to the next, or might this be kind of a flash in the pan thing where, like you said, you turn over head coaches at the 2 biggest programs in the state, and now you have maybe a bigger opportunity to go poach some kids that you were probably already in on ahead of time? So it depends. Not a very satisfying answer, but it does depend. So sometimes,
right, so it depends. The podcast. Thank you, Connor.
Thank you, Seth. Much appreciated. No, but so it depends on the underlying mechanism, the reason why they did so well. So like UNC did really well in Virginia because they have Dre Bly on staff, and Dre Bly is from the Virginia Beach area. He has a bunch of connections to the local Virginia Beach high schools, and he parlays that into like, oh, oh, I know all the kids in Virginia Beach, and I know their coaches, and they all trust me because I'm from the area. He has that connection, and of course, he talked to coaches in the area. They tell you about other kids in other schools. You go to those schools, and it just kind of like branches out from networks out from there. So the primary reason UNC does so well in Virginia year over year, or especially this year in particular, is because even though they only 2 of their 6 Virginia recruits were from Virginia Beach, the fact that Dre Bly has such strong connections within Virginia and he earns a salary by recruiting Virginia Beach, that we can expect UNC like year over year, they will always be competitive in Virginia as long as Dre Bly is on staff, just because of how strong his connections are.
So I'm curious. I think you've written an article about this, and this is, I think it's related just about how, we always get this talk whenever like there's a new coaching staff coming into a place or a new coach individual coming into a staff, and there's this idea that, well, he is from, like Diante joins my staff, so therefore we will go and get San Diego kids because Diante is from San Diego. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
And we hear this all the time. Like, oh, now they have the access to this part of the country that they didn't have before. I guess pretty broadly, true or false? You're going to give me something in the middle. I know you're going to.
Soft true.
Okay.
Yeah, big middle guy over here. So the way that thing tends to work, like if I have Deontay on my staff and say I get SoCal, it like I said earlier, it depends on a couple different factors. So like Kevin Sumlin when he went to Arizona is an illustrative example here. So you bring in Kevin Sumlin on staff. Kevin Sumlin has all these Houston, East Texas connections. You say, okay, we are Arizona. We are gonna focus on Houston. We have Kevin freaking Sumlin. We're gonna get Houston now, and then you don't. So Arizona doesn't have a long history of being very good. So that obviously doesn't help. But the big thing is distance plays a huge factor. Like if Dre Bly up and becomes, joins Lincoln Riley's staff, and Lincoln Riley thinks that's going to parlay into them doing well in Virginia Beach. Well, maybe because it's USC, but not as it does. It wouldn't have the returns you expect because you're still asking kids to fly across the country all the way away from their family, which is it's a really difficult task. Anytime you're asking kids to fly places, that's when you see the probability of a kid committing like really, really drop. And it makes sense that you don't want to be that far from home usually. So it contextually, yes, like Bama, like if Bama hires someone who's a really good West Coast recruiter, they will do better on the West Coast because that recruiter is familiar with the area, he knows the high schools, he can really all that. But the returns, functionally, it boils down to how far are you away. That's really what it boils down to at the end of the day.
Let's talk about Southern California. Anything that, well, first thing is Diante. Mm-hmm. It happened finally. You have a quarterback.
Yes.
Now I want to I want to expose Diante for a second because the cope on this man.
Here we go.
The cope was incredible for about 3 weeks. His whole thing for 3 weeks was, I don't care where Caleb Williams goes. I just need closure. I don't care if he goes to Wisconsin.
That was genuine.
I don't care where it's at. I just want to know where he's going.
That was genuine. No, okay. I don't want to call it coping. I will say I was couching everything. And that's what I mean when I say what I was saying was genuine. Like I was 100% couching everything. Because at a certain level, man, whatever, it's SC, and based on the way that I feel about the program, right? I can speak for me. I saw what they weren't just 4-8. I saw what that 4-8 looked like in 2021. So I wasn't really walking into this year thinking Lincoln Riley year one, we're about to just be rolling. I knew even with the transfer class prior to Caleb Williams and what they were bringing in on the high school level this year. It doesn't really address the core needs that this program has to make the turnaround that it wants. Now, obviously, when you throw in the variable of a Caleb Williams, I'm intrigued, and of course, I'm happy to see him be a Trojan. And for all the reasons that I kind of detailed on Twitter the day that he announced his that he had signed and was enrolling in classes or whatever. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't. At the end of the day, dude, I don't care. One leaves, another comes in. Like, it's nice to have, and I think that for USC, on USC's perspective, like getting the guy that will be here for at least 2 years for Lincoln's first 2 years, that's probably the program changer, regardless of like wins and losses. As long as Caleb is productive and they win the Pac-12 South these next 2 seasons, they're probably good money for the next like 3-4 years after that, almost no matter what, based on their momentum on the recruiting trail, from what I see.
Yeah, I think the Caleb Williams thing as an individual prospect is a little different because we have seen him play and he's a transfer and stuff like that. But I've tried to get away from this, and it's kind of what you're saying at the beginning, Connor. It's like, when I look at LSU and I'm like, I need them to get this guy. I need to get that guy. And it's like, I just need them to get good players. Like, and someone, and you get enough good athletes and enough of them pan out and you win national titles. But just to go back to something you were saying, Diante, for USC, you said like this, just this one quarterback doesn't necessarily address, everything that's wrong with the program. Are we talking like line play?
It's all trench talent. Yeah, it's all just attrition with trench talent. Like, they put a couple guys in the pros the last couple of years on the defensive line. Guys that I think will be decent to good pros. Obviously, Drake Jackson is one of the guys who will probably draw a lot of attention. He's probably he'll be a decent day 2 addition, I'd imagine, for a lot of teams. And then offensive line wise, like when USC was rolling, you have your Matt Khalils, you have your Tyron Smiths, right? Like that offensive line and tight end position was obviously a really big piece of them being able to build the run game that allows Reggie Bush to average 10 yards per touch in his Heisman year. So that to me is what has to be addressed. USC has never hurt for wide receiver talent. They have not developed the defensive back position very well, but they typically get blue chips at that spot too. Like, a lot of this is just like not having a real quarterback since Darnold, obviously, and then number 2 is not having real trench talent to kind of get you by on a year-by-year basis. I mean, we saw that basically cost Alabama a shot at the national championship because they could play Georgia just about even at all the skill positions, but being a minus in the trenches will lose you games against other teams that are loaded up on the blue chip ratio, and that's kind of what I think needs to be addressed right now.
Let's stay on the West Coast and let's go to Arizona, because I think Arizona is one of the most interesting states to talk about in terms of recruiting. So Connor, give me like the 10,000 foot view of what happened in Arizona this year.
Okay, so 10,000 foot view is University of Arizona got got new coaching staff, and they weren't very good. There's not a lot of talent on the roster, not a ton to work with, and transition recruiting classes, as we said. Arizona State got caught bringing kids on campus during COVID,
Yep.
and they were like taking pictures and stuff. So they were cheating poorly, and you can't cheat poorly.
The dumbest violations, honestly, the absolute dumbest violations.
Yeah, like so
it's ridiculous.
So they cheated poorly, and so they got caught. And now, to date, 5 coaches have either been resigned or forced to resign or fired, or something. 5 coaches have left staff as a result of this thus far. There are some rumblings about Herm Edwards might be next to go, so they've kind of fallen apart. And the population of Arizona is interesting because over the past 15-ish years, you've had a bunch of families move into Arizona from other parts of the country.
Yes,
and particularly Southern California. So there's not a lot of commitment. There's not a like home commitment. There's not as many kids who grow up in Phoenix. That's where all the talent comes from in Arizona. There's not that many kids who grow up in Phoenix saying, "Oh, I'm going to be a Sun Devil. I'm going to be a Wildcat." As there are kids in Los Angeles that go say, "Oh, I want to be a Trojan."
Right.
There's not that level of thing. So what you get is, especially this year in particular, it's a very balkanized state. Balkanized meaning earlier, basically there's a bunch of different schools in there. No one has control over it. So they have a pretty wide open, it's a pretty wide open state at the moment, like a battleground state during elections. Mm-hmm. Much akin to the last presidential election.
Right.
Funnily enough. So, yeah. Go ahead.
No, I think the thing with Arizona, obviously this is close to home for me, and I have a lot of the anecdotal, stories behind this of people who would like to live between LA and San Diego, but obviously there's an issue of being able to pay for new developments that are being built, and the people who own things that aren't new developments aren't coming off of them, right? Because of the amount of equity that they have built up in their homes. It's just not. It doesn't make sense for what houses are worth now. It wouldn't make sense to sell because the housing market basically never goes down in Southern California. So a lot of people kind of have been pushed, if not to like the Inland Empire areas like Menifee, Temecula, people who are familiar with that kind of in between land between LA and San Diego. You are going to Vegas or you're going to Arizona, right? Like that's basically it. And to your point, they're all going to like the Phoenix Scottsdale area. You want to go play for Saguaro, you want to go play for Chandler, you want to go play for those big time programs because those are the programs in Arizona that have traditionally attracted that top Pac-12 the top Pac-12 schools. You're going to attract the top Big 12 schools, right? And I see a lot of that happening still to this day, and I'm sure it's just going to keep going up. The other state that, to kind of swing you in another direction, the other state that I was really kind of honed in on was Georgia winning Florida, based on what you were looking at. Do you think, and obviously this is, I think a piece of this is Billy Napier being hired when he was, right? And I think that his initial messaging was that they're not really going all in on 22 in Florida because they knew probably that they were going to lose out on a lot of these recruiting battles anyways. What do you see in Georgia's class? And obviously they've kind of built this thing up year over year. Do you think that the class that they're putting together now kind of rivals the kind of dominance that they've had in that deep South area, especially in the Southeast, as far as recruiting those top tier players?
Yeah, so Georgia, UGA in Florida is an interesting case because they didn't win a particular city in Florida. There's five major cities in Florida, two of which are good, two of which are okay. Tallahassee's not very good. Fun fact: the third highest rated player in Tallahassee committed to Western Illinois. Fun fact.
That's interesting.
Sure.
That's really interesting.
It's because Tallahassee's not very good, but that kid is fast, and his name's Tyler Sanders, and he's going to Western Illinois. Anyways, so where Georgia got most of their talent in,
I'm going to tag him to listen to the podcast. I'll find his Twitter account.
I hope he's doing great. No, but so where Georgia. So this is a question of how well Georgia is doing in Florida, and this ultimately becomes a question of where did Georgia win within the state of Florida. Most of where Georgia, I think, got one or two kids. They won with 4 in Florida. They won with either 1 or 2 kids in Miami. So they're not like cleaning up in South Florida. South Florida is always very balkanized, very, very battleground. It's a bloodbath every year. But they also got a decent amount of IMG kids, IMG and Tampa area kids. So it's a quirk in the data where sometimes in 247, I get all the data from 247. Some of the IMG kids are noted as being from places that aren't IMG. Other IMG kids are just said from being from Bradenton. So it kind of depends, but really where Florida is winning, they got a couple top kids from Miami and they got a couple top kids from IMG. So that's really where Georgia's winning. So this isn't so much a story of Georgia marching, doing a twisted Sherman's march down into Florida and ransacking the state. It's, they won a couple key battles in Miami, and they won a couple key kids with really talented IMG kids. Really, I think the story of Florida isn't so much as Georgia doing really well in the state as it is the big three in Florida just not doing the damn thing, really. And you hope with Billy Napier being hired, Mario Cristobal getting the thing going to Miami, that helps. But as it stands, I think that's the big takeaway with Florida.
If we go over to Louisiana, is there, and I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't have this data, but I'm going to ask you anyways. So are we seeing a similar thing with, Diante talked about the economics of Southern California leading to, and like you said, anecdotally, but I think it is somewhere in the data, all these people, these families leaving that neck of woods for, like you said, the inland, we used to call it Inland Empire and Phoenix and stuff like that, and Las Vegas. With Louisiana, it probably more has to do with climate change and those issues, which, I mean, it's part of economics, but whatever, we don't want to get into that right now.
The economics also in Louisiana are a bit on the downtrend because
of course,
and the natural gas and oil and shit.
Well, so the question is, are we seeing that? I mean, first, tell me about the balkanization of Louisiana. I mean, I know the answer is LSU getting everyone, but so answer that, and then if you know anything about how the population of the state is changing there, in vis-a-vis recruiting.
Yeah. So, with respect to balkanization of Louisiana, LSU has won. They're one of like three or four states, I think, that have won the state every single year since 2011.
That's true.
Arkansas, Ohio State, and Wisconsin, I think. So since the second Huey Long said, "I'm going to make LSU a football school," they should win Louisiana. Something's going terribly wrong if they don't.
Right.
But
everyone needs to be fired.
It went terribly wrong in the 90s.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So LSU should win Louisiana. They do. They have. Hopefully they will. But what you see is their plurality so how many kids they've gotten to win the state. That's gone down. That's been on a slight downward trend in recent years. I think 2020 was the low point with like 4, which is still pretty good, but relative to where they were in the early 2010s, around between 7 and 9 most years. So there is a bit of a downward trend this year. Brian Kelly was down to 5 with LSU this year. Which is still strong relative to the rest of America, but in Louisiana as LSU, that's a bit low. So the balkanization is very slowly dripping into LSU. I'm not necessarily a fan, but you wonder if that will reverse, if that will mitigate under Brian Kelly. He seems to have a bunch of old Louisiana guys on staff. He has a bunch of stout people with SEC bona fides on staff. So there is reason to believe. And he seems to be able to run an a good logistic administration with respect to recruiting. So you hope that he might be able to mitigate some of that. But we aren't seeing a ton of it. But Alabama, of course, Nick Saban's decided he's going to go into a state, he's going to go there. So right. That's driving a lot of it. But in terms of where we see families leaving, and we do see a population drip in Louisiana, and how is that affecting recruiting? At the moment, it seems to be not super strong at the moment. These families then, families who leave Louisiana, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would tend to believe they go to Houston, they go to Atlanta, they go to Nashville, they go to North Carolina. So they still are within striking range of LSU. But generally, we see the families leaving Louisiana has not affected the recruiting too much as of now. Obviously, things are getting warmer, things are getting hotter down there, and that is a continuing issue. And in the coming years, we expect that to be an issue. But at the moment, it's, you can hold your butts and be all right for 5-10 years at least. What it seems.
Right. I think the last region I have a lot of interest in is like the Great Lakes and extending out to kind of that lower northeastern area. Like, were there any surprises, anything interesting in the data that you pulled? Obviously, I'm looking at the map. I see that Michigan State won the state of Michigan. You see Michigan working in Illinois. Was there anything outside of that kind of caught your eye, or any trends that have been followed, between those schools, or Rutgers, Ohio State, Penn State, some of those Big Ten schools? What is the data telling you this year? And I guess if you were to roll it together with some of the other years that you've been collecting this data about recruiting trends in the Midwest.
Rutgers, Wayne, New Jersey is big. Rutgers, New Jersey has a lot of talent. I mean, it's all Philly and New York suburbs.
Right.
So, if you're from New York City and you're really good, you go to a Catholic school in North Jersey, and then Rutgers is right there.
Yeah.
So they can get that.
Prep school central out there.
Yeah, that's a big East Coast thing. But in terms of the Midwest, Illinois. So your three big states in the Midwest are Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois. By Michigan, I do mean Detroit. And by Ohio, I mean Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, mostly Cincinnati. And by Illinois, I mean St. Louis suburbs and Chicago. Mm-hmm. Chicago, obviously, like per capita, per recruit, isn't as good as some other places, but it's really damn big. So you get a couple good kids. Michigan losing to Michigan State, go blue. In Michigan isn't a terribly. I went to Michigan, by the way, in case you didn't know that. So that isn't a terribly surprising thing. Michigan has been going more of an Ohio State route of, we're going to get a couple top kids in the state, in Detroit. And then we're going to kind of just branch out. In particular, they did really well in Jacksonville this year. They won Jacksonville. And they also won Chicago, and thus they won Illinois. So that's not terribly surprising. St. Louis, actually, the past couple of years has been really good. Like they've had some dudes come out of there, and Missouri has gotten a lot of them. Like I'm actually low key pretty high on Missouri in 24, 25, just because 22 class in Missouri was in St. Louis is really strong. They had that 5-star receiver that they got, and 23 there looks to be some dudes who I think are committed to Missouri at the moment. But those are the two, in terms of the Midwest, those are the two big things.
But in terms of Ohio State, in Ohio, because we were talking about before how they don't have the top, they don't go and get the top recruits from like each individual city. They don't lock down a city, and they've kind of become very national in their recruiting. Is that what you see too in the data?
Yeah. You see that in the data. Ohio State likes to pick and choose. Ohio State also extends a lot fewer offers than a lot of other schools. Them and Clemson only give out like around 100 a year, whereas school like Michigan State and Tennessee will give upwards of 400 or 500. So they give a lot fewer than other schools. Excuse me. And so in terms of Ohio is a good football state. In the volume, they produce about as much talent as Louisiana on a year-by-year basis. So what Ohio State does is say, okay, we have this bunch of talent, but we're just going to get the top. We're just going to skim off the top of it, get the top 5 kids or so, and then we're going to go to Atlanta, then we're going to go to Dallas, then we're going to go to LA, and then we're going to go down to Florida, and then maybe North Carolina if we're feeling spicy, or DC. So really, Ohio State is pretty national in terms of like universally national schools. That's more like Stanford and Notre Dame. But Ohio State, in the way we mean national, they are extremely national.
Finally, did we? I don't think we talked about it, but I know you wanted to talk about Tennessee, the issues there.
Yeah, so Tennessee University of is very frustrating to me, and that's because Tennessee, the state, is growing very rapidly, particularly in Nashville and Knoxville, but Knoxville is smaller and to a lesser degree. So Tennessee is very frustrating because obviously, as I mentioned earlier, Kentucky won Tennessee. They had 3 of the top 15 recruits, and Tennessee had 1 of the top 15 recruits, and that was number 15. So less than ideal. Mm-hmm. And so you wonder, okay, what the hell is going on in Tennessee? So one, obviously, it's a new regime, transition class, a little weird. Sure, give it to you. Also, and Tennessee looks to have sanctions looming, so that obviously is very difficult to recruit against.
Right.
And then of course they weren't what's given by local media as a reason. I presume their sources are people close or involved with the coaching staff. Is that they are not able. This new coaching staff, very few of which are from Tennessee, are able to have in-person visits as a result of COVID, and that's a decent detriment. Now, why I find this frustrating is they only gave out at least in the class of 22, they only gave out 32 offers to recruits in Tennessee recruits, but they also gave out 32 offers to Alabama recruits. And going into Nick Saban's home state is not as nice of a proposition as going into your home state where there's a high school about 45 minutes outside of campus that has the number 2 recruit in the whole nation,
right?
And a bunch of talented kids, and you don't call them. That's a bit frustrating. So I find Tennessee to be a really interesting case because they actually did really well in Atlanta. They did really well in. They got a couple of kids from Texas. When they pick and chose their spots, they did all right. But they pick and chose their spots in a really kind of weird way to me. And you think it would just be more efficient to just put your butt down in Nashville and see what happens, right. And they didn't do that.
All right, Mr. Conor McQuiston, thank you for
That's
your
me.
time. Appreciate it.
Before you go, one thing before you go,
what's up?
I mean, I do want you to kind of plug some of the work you do outside of just like signing day. Like, can you give people like a brief kind of picture of the data that you're collecting, some of the things that you're pulling from it contextually, and how you're able to kind of translate some of this stuff over the stretch of an entire year?
Yeah, so it's a lot of scraping 247 Sports. I'll tell you what, and 247 Sports is a miserable website to scrape. That is the primary data source of that's where we see how many offers has a school extended, where they extended their offers, who is committing to them, where are those kids from. I also spent like $10 buying a data source that maps cities in a state to a county, and from there I just kind of draw circles around cities and say this is the city area. And that could make people very mad if they looked any closer at the maps, but I'm glad they don't. Like what I call Philly is very generous. So recruiting wise, that's the main stuff I do. Then typical research process, you look around, you say, okay, why is this happening? And then I find the socioeconomic side of things pretty interesting. So say, okay, where are people moving to Nashville? I've heard people are moving to Nashville. Are they actually? Then you look into the data, and sometimes you stumble on cool things like there's just this one billionaire who kind of is trying to make Tulsa be a thing, but it's not happening, and he's a really eccentric dude. But that's a story for another day.
Tulsa wanted to give Bryce Rosser like $100,000 to move to Tulsa last week.
That's like a thing. No, there's like this program in Tulsa where they'll just give you $10,000 to live there for a year as you work somewhere else remote. So that's the recruiting side of things I do. I've been doing a lot of draft content lately, clustering different positions. Basically, I have data points and I draw circles around the data points. I say all the players in the circles are like each other. Mm-hmm. I post probably too much on Twitter. I do Wordle every day. I get it in one try. It's fantastic.
Yeah, you're very smart. You're such a smart boy.
Why'd you have to feel like that?
The most
esoteric
uncomfortable way to
movie take shit posts. That's what you got. That's what you got from me on Twitter.
Conor, this is always a pleasure.
Yes.
We really always learn a lot from your analysis, and hope to have you back on soon. But yeah, if you want to go find Conor's work, pff.com, and your Twitter handle is
Conor MCQ5. That's CONOR MCQ5.
There you go, Conor. Thanks for coming on.
Go Blue.